Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleagues, the senator from South Carolina, for his leadership, and also for our leader, the senator from Kentucky, for the incredible work that he has done in supporting our great friend Israel, and also in leading in this body in terms of the issues that he has brought forward, not only in supporting important protection like the Iron Dome system, but also in ensuring that America remains safe and strong. So thank you very much, Senator McConnell, for your leadership. I rise today because I had the privilege in March of traveling to Israel, and I went there not only to meet with the leadership in Israel, but I had the opportunity to meet with some of the Palestinian leadership as well. But to actually go to Sderot, a town in Israel, and I was very much struck about what the Israelis are facing every day and the threat that they face from Hamas, a terrorist organization. You know, you go to a town like Sderot, and everyone in their household has a bomb shelter. And I met with mothers there whose children feel traumatized because they never know when the next potential rocket may be coming toward their town, and it's very much affected their children. So much so that actually when you go to the playground where the children play, the playground itself contains a bomb shelter. So there's a caterpillar that looks like something that maybe your kids would play in, but it's actually a bomb shelter because this town in Israel has been facing rockets from Hamas. And that is what we need to understand in this conflict, that Hamas, a terrorist organization, has not only used the civilians, the Palestinians, as human shields, but they've also continued to threaten the children of Israel. So much so that their bomb shelters, that their playgrounds have bomb shelters. And what is happening right now in this conflict is that Israel is trying to defend itself against this threat of rockets from Hamas that threatens their children and threatens the Palestinian children who unfortunately have been put in harm's way by this terrorist organization, Hamas. But they're facing a new threat. Can you imagine if we were faced with the threat that terrorists could pop up through a tunnel and suddenly terrorize the people in this country, what we would do to address that threat? And that is the threat that the Israelis are facing right now. So they need to eliminate these tunnels to ensure that their people can be protected from this threat. And how did they build these tunnels? They actually built some of these tunnels using concrete that the Israelis let them have, the Palestinians, for building things like schools, and instead Hamas has taken this concrete and used it to build terror tunnels to allow them to either kidnap or kill Israeli citizens. And so we stand with the people of Israel and their right to defend themselves against this terrorist organization, Hamas, and the terror that it has brought upon not only the country of Israel, but also the terror that it has brought to the Palestinian people, and how Hamas stands in the way of peace in the region overall. And we also stand against the hypocrisy that we have seen on many levels, and that hypocrisy and double standard has been most apparent in the UN Human Rights Council and the recent resolution passed by that council. I have to wonder why that council exists in the United Nations, because you have countries like China, Cuba, Russia, and Venezuela issuing a resolution condemning Israel for what is happening in this conflict, but in no way even mentioning Hamas or what Hamas is doing to use civilians as shields, to use civilians as basically targets so that they can try to get support for the international community. And the opposite is happening in terms of what Israel is doing. It's such a contrast. Israel is taking steps to notify civilians if there's going to be a missile coming in their area. They have warned civilians to leave areas. They have taken extraordinary steps to protect civilian lives, in contrast to what Hamas is doing in using civilians as shields. And so we condemn in this body very clearly what the Human Rights Council has done. And the notion that we're going to follow what China, Cuba, Venezuela, and Russia would tell the world their view is on human rights that doesn't even mention the actions of a terrorist organization that is at the root of the conflict that we see right now in Gaza. Talk about the situation where the cat is watching the hen house. That's what's happening with this Human Rights Council. Frankly, this council, in my view, should be eliminated because it is the opposite of standing for human rights. It is standing up for terrorist organizations like Hamas. And I stand with the recommendations of my colleague from South Carolina and our leader that we need to absolutely condemn the Human Rights Council. We need to reaffirm this week before we leave in this body our support for Israel's right to defend itself and to eliminate the threat that these tunnels present to the Israeli people, and frankly also to the Palestinian people as well, and to allow them to finally address this threat from this terrorist organization, Hamas, because until this threat is eliminated, there can be no peace in this region. There cannot be peace for the Israeli people, and there cannot be peace for the Palestinian people. And so it is my hope that we will take this up this week, leader, and make sure that we clearly send a message to Israel that we stand with Israel, that we clearly send a message to the UN that we're not going to accept the hypocrisy of the Human Rights Council, that we clearly send a message to Hamas. We know who you are. You're a terrorist organization. Stop using civilians to try to accomplish your purpose, and we stand with you. And with that, I would yield the floor to my colleague.
Before Senator Ayotte loses the floor, I wanted to just commend her on her contribution to this discussion, particularly the stories with regard to your last trip to Israel. And also add, I'm sure the senator from New Hampshire agrees with me that the last thing the American government needs to be doing right now is trying to pressure Israel into a bad ceasefire that doesn't allow this terror to be stopped. It at times appears to me as if the American administration is trying to push the Israelis into stopping before they finish the job. And we all know, based on past history, that unless this operation is completed, the challenges will continue. I just wanted to see if the senator from New Hampshire shared my view on that.
I would fully share your view. And really, in order to end this threat, we need to support Israel in its right to eliminate the tunnels, to address the missiles and eliminate the missiles and the stash that Hamas has that they are targeting Israel with, which, by the way, would have had many more civilian casualties but for the Iron Dome system that we have supported and worked with Israel on. And finally, we need to get to a point where the Gaza is demilitarized and they're put in a position where this threat cannot continue. That's what we need to get at thinking about, but we need to allow Israel to deal with the threat of these tunnels and the missiles so that the children in Sderot will not continue to be targeted, that so children, not only Israeli children, but also Palestinian children, can live in peace in the region. And that can't happen when Hamas continues to be a terrorist organization that threatens all children in the region. Thank you.